Great. Good morning. Good morning, everybody, and welcome. Welcome back to this series, this so-called webinar discussion series, the one that we host with the Johannesburg Business School and Business Day SME Matters. This is, I think, the fourth in a series that we've had over the last few months. And it's really been an exciting discussion. My name is Lyal White. I am with the Johannesburg Business School, and my role here today is to facilitate. So it's a very, very exciting moment for me to be able to sit back, relax, and engage in an interesting conversation with some leaders in the space and some leaders and friends of mine that we have developed some thinking around some of the post-COVID issues that we're dealing with, but very importantly around technology and the interface with the development of small and medium-sized businesses, small, micro and medium-sized businesses, I want to add. So without further ado, I'm just going to launch straight into it. Those of you that have joined us will have seen the guest speakers, and I'm going to introduce them very, very briefly because you know their background, you've seen their short bios. But in addition to that, let me give you just some of a background to the topic of conversation today. Very, very interesting topic and timely right now as we sit and just about, I suppose it's about 9 months after COVID struck the world, and obviously well into it in terms of the second wave in the north, second wave in parts of Latin America, but where is that second wave here in Africa and South Africa? What are we doing about this? And that is one of the topics that we might, or one of the issues we might touch on throughout because of the impact of COVID, but also the trade-offs with economics, or the economic trade-offs, and how we're dealing with this in the small business space. Just a little bit of background to this. So and you would have read this in the short blurb around this. In the wake of COVID-19 or the COVID-19 pandemic, everything in our lives, from schooling to doctor's appointments to gym appointments, and I know that Toby is looking at this very, very closely because he went through this himself in that process. We had to do this all online, and of course, COVID had sometimes a detrimental effect to the way we live our lives, but it's changed the way we think, and it's changed the way we actually live our lives on a day-to-day basis. It has forced companies to use technology to reimagine almost every aspect of their business. Now, think about this. Those of you that are sitting in a corporate space, that is relatively easy because you have systems, and yes, the systems move like a big ship, but you have a lot of people in place to help you implement this and to actually get going very quickly. Small businesses, it takes a huge amount of personal time, investment, and that's investment of capital, and a really, really major mind shift change, or a shift in your way of thinking to actually implement this. And those are some of the issues that we're going to chat about today, as well as that interface with big technology providers, big data, and obviously the bigger businesses that we want to provide services to as the small businesses in that sector. There is no doubt that the future of the global economy will have everything to do with the digitalisation of this. So all about, we're not going to be thinking about the advent into the fourth industrial revolution. We are firmly there. What are we doing right now in terms of the advent of technology, digitalization, and obviously what we are seeing in the area of industry 4.0, but specifically for small businesses in the African context. Economic recovery does hinge, especially in our context, on the development, the growth, the performance of small businesses, small and medium-sized businesses. These are the engines of job creation, as you would have read about in the Business Day supplement. But what is very, very important, and when we look across the African continent, and I'm going to ask our speakers to address this in the African context. Small businesses and these SMEs that we talk about, those are the pistons of economic growth. Those they comprise such a large proportion of the economy. But is it having the same impact on job creation, or is it moving the needle on employment? I know that Toby did write a little bit about this in the Business Day recently, so we're going to probably ask him to talk a little bit about this as well. But Alistair and I have also spoken about the role that this plays in the job creation and creating not just jobs, creating work. And that is very, very important, is we have to distinguish between those. So looking at this and utilizing the best technology levers, digital tools and solutions to enhance the competitiveness of small businesses and ensure their survival, because obviously the survival rate is all important. Those are some of the topics that we're going to touch on today. So without further ado, I'm going to step aside and I'm going to ask our speakers to quickly introduce themselves. But just from my side, we are joined by Alistair Makwenya, who is the South African country head for Google. Very, very exciting. And yes, he's the South African country head. He has got a great interest in the rest of the continent. So please don't hesitate to ask him any questions about Africa in general. Obviously, a leading authority on tech, on marketing, on branding, but on everything that's relative to the impact on small businesses, but also on society at large. He's done some fantastic work, and he's also a professor of practice, I might add. And Alistair, I wasn't going to let this one slip away. A professor of practice at the Johannesburg Business School, where he has contributed to the development of that business school. And then Lindsay Duff, she is the senior lead for What 3 Words. I'm going to ask Lindsay to also talk a little bit about what 3 words is. What is What 3 Words? And the importance of mapping, the importance of this type of connecting. I see Lindsay and I see the great work that What 3 Words doing. I see them as connecting businesses, but connecting people with people. That is the most important thing, is that connectedness is all important. And then our old friend, not that old, I might add, Toby Shapshak. He is the editor-in-chief and publisher of Stuff Magazine. He's an entrepreneur. He's a small business owner. And you'll see he has interfaced a lot with government agencies if you read some of his most recent articles, but a frequent engager and facilitator at the Johannesburg Business School and a thought leader in the space. I've been reading his articles throughout the COVID lockdown period, and he's really been thinking about and talking about the innovations that have to take place in the area of e-commerce, etc. So without further ado, I see Alistair's face is off the screen. So we will start, Alistair, if you are there, we'll start with you just with a brief introduction, then we'll go into Lindsay, and then we'll go into Toby. But give us a short, brief introduction. If you're not there, Alistair, we can start with Lindsay, but over to you for now.
I am here, Lyal. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but you are a blank space at the moment. Are you having some trouble with your connectivity there?
Can you see me now?
Not at this stage.
Okay, I can see you. Okay, sorry about that.
Loud and clear, loud and clear. Not to worry, Alistair. And we do like to see your face, your smiling face on this big screen in front of us. So over to you, Alistair. Maybe you can just give us some thoughts on the topic and just a little bit of background about the great work that you guys are doing.
Awesome. Thank you, Lyal. Good to see you. Lovely to see Toby and Lindsay. So I head up Google in South Africa, but we work as a Pan-African team, so we get involved in kind of the African agenda. I think for me, what's really exciting is that as soon as COVID hit, we decided as a company, well, globally, to get involved and to be part of the solution. So the first phase of our intervention was really around in the health space. How can we use technology to help government, plan, disseminate the right kind of information on our platforms and so on, keep people safe, help with things like community mobility reports to show where people are moving to and so on. So that's kind of been the first phase, and also getting involved in the exposure notification app, commonly known as the COVID-19 app. And then over the last couple of weeks, we've pivoted our focus away from that into economic recovery. And I think for us, there's a realization that small businesses build economies. If you look around the world, economies are actually built on small businesses. Small businesses are big job creators. In South Africa, I think it was Engineering News report from last year that said small businesses employ about 48% of the workforce, and they contribute 20% of the GDP. So if you're going to make an intervention, this is quite a good place to start, we think. So there's a whole lot of things we're doing in this space. But I think for me, what I'm really passionate about, and I think I've spoken to you about this lot, I've just completed my PhD, and I did it on the impact of digital disruption on the advertising business model. So I'm very passionate about kind of business model sort of innovation as a response to digital disruption. So if I look at SMEs and how vulnerable they are, mainly because of the digital divide. And digital divide, happens at a global level where developing countries have much more access, to digital skills as opposed to developing countries. And then at a social level, obviously between the haves and the have-nots, there's a big need to try and equalize access to digital skills and so on, because we've seen what a big equalizer technology can be. So I'm really, really interested in helping businesses retool, repurpose their business models to respond to all this disruption, and I think that's quite relevant right now.
Wonderful. Great, Alistair. Thank you so much. And we're going to come back to this, because obviously the idea that how we actually use the data and how we can make use of some of the platforms that you have provided, or that Google have provided through this. And I want to come back to this idea of the cost of data, and whether we need to start exploring and trying to unlock free data and what that might do for the creation of businesses. But you and I will come back to this, and I'm sure that Lindsay and Toby will definitely weigh in on some of those. We are also going to look at some of those numbers. The numbers are so important, and we've learned this through COVID. If we do not know the numbers, we cannot make the right decisions, and we make the wrong choices as we go along in terms of combating a virus that has really gripped the world and South Africa in this process. So the numbers help us understand this, and that's why I think we should come back to this as well. Lindsay, I'm going to ask you to speak a little bit about, tell us a little bit about What 3 Words, but also how this relates to this topic and what the impact is having on connecting people. Fill us in a little bit there, Lindsay.
Thanks, Lyal. Nice to see you, and Alistair and Toby as well. So I'm with a business called What 3 Words, and I head up our operations in South Africa and across the continent as well. And we are a business that essentially seeks to replace traditional addresses as we know them. So if I was to say to you, meet me at 15 Adderley Street, you might say, do you mean 15 or 50 Adderley Street? Which is a bit of a problem. But actually, we know that large parts of the world don't have an address, full stop. And that's a significant barrier to economic prosperity, to just participating in your own economy, in your own democracy. If you think about the millions of people across this country alone, never mind the billions around the world, who don't have access to a traditional address, it means that they can't actually open a bank account, they can't register a new SIM card, in some instances they can't even vote. So not having a traditional address is a massive problem, and we thought we actually need an address system for the 21st century. We need to abandon the system that we've been using for centuries, hundreds of years, where we've been using these traditional addresses that constantly have to be updated and rolled out. And we thought, let's completely rethink it. So what we did is we divided the world into a grid of 3 meter by 3 meter squares, and we gave every single square in the whole world a unique address made up of 3 dictionary words. So as an example, our address in Joburg can be found at the 3 words finishes, aura, moves. And it's the only 3 by 3 square in the world that's called finishes, aura, moves. And it means that anyone can now talk about anywhere really, really simply. So every single 3 by 3 meter square in the world already has 3 words assigned to it. And this can be used in a multiple, in a sort of variety of use cases. If you think about actually all the industries that are impacted by location, well, you talk about connecting people, moving things. Actually, it's pretty critical. You need an accurate location. We know that GPS coordinates are obviously also universal, but they're pretty much impossible for most people to use. We've done studies in South Africa that have shown us that around 80% of South Africans don't know what a GPS coordinate is. So we simply took a GPS coordinate and made it more human friendly by turning it into words. We're not just available in English, we're available in 46 languages now, including Zulu, Xhosa, and Afrikaans for the South African market, and have plans to roll that out. We've just launched Amharic for Ethiopia, and we've got others like Kenya, Rwanda on the pipeline as well. So it's about essentially providing an inclusive, accessible address to literally everyone so that they can start using that, not just to get a pizza delivered, but also for basic services. And we've been working in the last couple of years with everybody from emergency services in South Africa, like Gauteng EMS and Western Cape EMS, who can respond to a What 3 Words address now in their regions, to logistics companies that use us for significant savings in that last mile, which we know is obviously really important. So we've been working, I mean, we are a scale up ourselves. We've just closed our Series C round of £50 million. And we're working essentially to provide an addressing system for all South Africans and actually all Africans that is as accessible as possible and inclusive as possible based on the languages that they speak.
That's wonderful. Thank you. That's a nice background, and it's a very, very interesting take on just really disrupting what we understand about mapping, but also connecting people, connecting business. What comes to mind when at your introduction really is how we're looking at not only mapping, but digitalization in general, and how this actually, and through this process of COVID, might have increased certain divides and increase inequality in many respects. But what we can do to combat that, not only this, is how can we ensure that connectedness and the advent of certain technologies and digitization actually disembeds inequality. I think that's a very, very important point. I know it's a very big question, but we want to smash it. Inequality is obviously one of the biggest problems that we have here in South Africa, and it's an increasing problem in the rest of Africa. So this is something that I think we need to just think about for the next line of questions and conversation. But I really do think it's important. Toby, I'm going to ask you to give us a quick, brief introduction and some of your thoughts on the topic of discussion today.
Sure, and I just want to say at the outset that I'm a non-practicing health fanatic. You were talking about all this fitness stuff during COVID. I understand the theory, but I'm non-practicing. I don't even know why we're talking about having technology in business. It's a no-brainer. Have you ever asked a fish about water? We live in a technology world. It's impossible to work or function without technology, be it our smartphones or the internet or Google itself or any of the services. So, I started my small business 2 days after I got back from my first honeymoon in 2001. I got retrenched. Everyone said that was terrible. I went, well, thank God it was 2 days afterwards. At least I got a nice holiday before I ended up starting my own business. And I'd only ever studied English literature and journalism. So I didn't have a kind of business background. And I got a friend of mine to help me understand it and explain the basics of business to me over a chicken salad with extra avo. And the next Saturday, he was a big time management consultant. He's now the CEO of a huge management consultant firm, but we were just, young guys who lived in the same block of flats. And then the next Saturday, I got him to tell me exactly the same thing for another chicken salad with extra avo. And that was really all I learned about business, apart from the kind of commonsensical things you do, which is don't spend money on flashy things you don't need. Don't have big fancy offices. Don't buy, flashy things, but do spend your money on the important things. I always make sure I spend money on my technology, on my laptops, on the tools to do your job. And I was working at the Mail and Guardian before I got retrenched. And I remember saying to my boss, a genius of an entrepreneur called Erwin Manoyam, I said to him, the problem with getting something for free is you get what you paid for. And that was because we had a free internet connection, but it was always problematic and it didn't work. And I realized way back then, while I was trying to run a business at the time we were running the first news website in Africa, that there's some things you can do for free and there's some things you can't. And I don't want to step on your territory, Alistair, but I, for instance, pay for all the services my business uses. And I set up stuff to operate as a cloud-based business when it was in the early days of this idea that the computer was no longer a laptop or a desktop on your desk, but something in the cloud. And that's part of the shift of consciousness. Now, it's a no-brainer. Everybody's by default in the cloud, as it were. But it's how you use it and what you use and how you minimize the time you waste trying to understand technical things. So as a small business owner, as opposed to a technology journalist, my theory has always been do what you're good at, hire people to do what you're not good at. And usually that means an accountant. I don't speak maths as a first language. I studied English literature, and yet I know that I'm not good at it, whereas it'll take me 2 or 3 hours at whatever hourly rate I am. I outsource it to my accountant, and they do it at a much better rate, lower and lower. And so that's, to my mind, how we have to understand technology, right? So I understand the technology, therefore I can be the IT manager for my business. I can set up the new stuff. I do know what the trends are, and I do know how to use it. And of course, if you don't, read more Stuff magazine, obviously, but get someone who understands this for you. I'm amazed at how much free and available information is out there. Every now and again, if I have a problem or someone has a problem, I'll just Google the results. Hear me say the word Google. And mostly if you're looking for Gmail or communications problem on the actual platform, they will tell you how to fix it. So what I've realized is that it's not just the technology you choose, but how you choose it and how you use it that that makes your business function better. I set up my business in a way that it didn't matter where you were to do your job, because that's the nature of journalism. So when COVID hit, we all just walked out the door. I mean, the most we did was take our keyboards from the office and our big monitors, and we all set up at home. That's the world we live in, and it should be the way every business is set up, because it's just a no-brainer. And all I'm talking about is file sharing. You no longer need to have a computer in the corner as the file server. You can use Dropbox, you can use Google Drive, you can use Microsoft OneDrive, you can use Box, you can use a range of technology, Apple's iCloud, all of these things do the job. You can use Google, you can Gmail, you can use Hotmail, you can use just about anything. It's a no-brainer. It's the entry level requirement that you will host your technology, but it's how you use it and how you utilize what is available to you. I think, Lyal, is the kind of thing we're going to discuss today.
I think it's fascinating, Toby, what you are saying, and I've sat with Michael Jordan, who obviously was in the corporate space, and he's now gone into a startup area, and one of the very interesting areas that he always brings up over and over again is how they spent so much money putting or purchasing things when he was in the corporate space, and he realized that you don't have to actually spend a lot of those monies, because a lot of it is available to those. And I think this is a message out to all those entrepreneurs, is that things are possible at a much lower cost, and especially now. But I think just building
Can I take umbrage with one word you used about me? Thank you for your very nice description, but I don't think of myself as an entrepreneur. I really don't. I just think of myself as a unintentional businessman, albeit a Jewish businessman. So I can throw Yiddish into words. It makes you sound good. In fact, I've started using Jewish guilt as a sales technique. It's very effective, I already know. But there's a difference, and people want to be an entrepreneur. I don't. I just want to pay my staff salaries, and I think there's nothing wrong with just being a businessman. I've done nothing in the world that is new or different or exciting. I just run a business, and I think that's the key. You don't have to change the world. You just have to look after the people in your community, which is how I grew up in the Jewish community. You look after your people, your family, your community, and that's the starting point, I think, for the misapprehension about being an entrepreneur. You don't have to change the world. You just have to look after your people.
Okay, so Toby, what we'll do is we'll shy away from the titles of entrepreneur and prof and all these other things, and we'll just focus on the task at hand, and we'll grow and scale business, new businesses. I think that's a really, really cool area. What you did touch on, which I want to come back to, because it's an area, is the impact you have on the people around you, but also importantly, what the role of business might be, and what technology and business, the interface of technology and small business in building community. Because I think community is one area that we are falling off a little bit in terms of how we actually bind ourselves. But I want Alistair to again build off what you've been talking about, and especially around this understanding of digital transformation during this time that we've gone through into COVID, because I think it has, without a doubt, and we've spoken about this, it's compressed megatrends, it's accelerated change and transformation, and sometimes we sit here in South Africa and we say, has it done it for the better or for the worse? Alistair, this also speaks to one or two questions that are coming in from Kevin. I see that he's asked also that Google, how can Google assist us in marketing our SME brands? Those types of things. So I think some of the things that Toby spoke to, maybe you can talk a little bit to this to address Kevin's question as well.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I actually want to sort of plus one Toby's view there. Business is about service. I think some people make the mistake of getting into business just with a profit motive, but you very quickly run out of runway. And I think if you don't realize that you're here to serve, you've got a big surprise coming. So I think for me, it's very easy for innovators and tech people to be self-serving, to come up with solutions that go looking for problems. And I think the starting point must be, what are you solving for, right? So what we try and do as Google is try and deploy technology to solve the world's problems. I mean, if your mission is about, sort of organizing the world's information and making it useful and accessible to everybody, the word that drives basically all our actions is the sense of helpfulness. So we discovered very quickly that sort of SMME are much more vulnerable because of lack of digital skills, lack of access to tools and solutions, whereas large corporates, many of them were on a digital transformation journey, albeit slow. Many of them had big IT sort of teams thinking about future capabilities, building delivery capabilities. So when you're an SMME and you've got a physical store and no digital presence, and COVID hit and people go into lockdown, you literally cut off from your lifeline. You have no access to markets. So what we did was we actually launched something called a digital hub, which was a place where we put all the digital skills and solutions and training, and we've given free access to anybody and everybody. And I think 2 years ago, we made an undertaking to train 10 million Africans on digital skills. We realized technology, actually the internet is a big, sort of equalizer. I remember in 2011, I went on a trip to Ghana. I was working for Cadbury at the time, and 80% of Cadbury's cocoa comes from Ghana. So we went out as a leadership team to kind of visit the cocoa plantation farmers and to understand how we can help as a business. And there were really two things. One was ecotourism, so how we can create some sort of cocoa route, just like we have the wine route in Stellenbosch. And the second thing was about digital connectivity. And the big question was, if we were to get individual cocoa plantation farmers on the internet, basically with a cell phone, with just a smartphone, these people would be able to trade cocoa on the world market. They would have direct access to markets. There'd be no middleman, and they'd literally be able to monetize their craft and their produce. And we walked away knowing that if you could just give the average person access to the internet, you will turn their lives around. So the first thing was the digital hub, giving access to digital skills. The next thing was Google My Business. Google My Business basically says, if you've got a physical store, let's say you're a seamstress or you've got a confectionery business, you bake cakes for birthday parties and stuff like that, and baby showers, we will help you create a website. You can do it yourself. We'll give you the tools, step-by-step guide, or we can do it for you in a matter of hours, basically. Description of your business, GPS coordinates, phone number. You can upload a couple of photos and so on. What's really good about that website is anybody who does a search for a confectionery in that particular area, you will get traffic, you will get hits. And once people are happy with your products, because obviously, you would need to kind of invest in e-commerce capability, we will help you with all of that stuff. You can now get orders online, which helps you scale. It's not just people that pass your house and see your big signage. It's anybody on the internet who's after confectionery. They can now find you, but they can also leave reviews. And what's good about reviews is that we use machine learning to take all those insights and we generate advertising material for you. And we call that a marketing kit. So that's your ad agency in your back pocket, basically. So we've got you your website now. Now we're helping you create advertising material for free, by the way. Then the next thing is, how do we give you access to geographic expansion? How do we give you access to foreign markets? We've got a product called Market Finder, and Market Finder basically is about Google giving you insights on those foreign countries, distribution, logistics considerations, access to marketing, consumer insights and taste and so on, to help you set up your business offshore and be able to do that. Because when you talk to SMEs, they really have three needs. It's access to capital and funding, access to skills, resources and training. Then the last one is access to markets. So we're now thinking about, can we intervene in the way of capital? Can we create loans? Can we give grants? And we're not there yet. Our biggest point of intervention right now has been about democratizing access to digital training, because that's a big unlock.
Okay, fantastic. So one of the things that I want us to touch on, Alistair, we're going to come back to these because there is a real interest at the moment around the practical interventions the practical interventions that we can make, and you made some reference to this, and also the education that we can. So one of the questions that does come through is how we actually change the culture of use around this and what we can do to anticipate these changes. Just give some thought to that. But before we actually go to this, I actually want to ask Lindsay a very, very specific question, is around the work that they are doing, not just What 3 Words, but also just this thinking. How can small businesses make use of what you do, and not only what you do, but also the thinking around the shift in mapping and things like that. So it's small businesses, but also in the society that we live in here in South Africa, and also accessing new markets, perhaps in other parts of the continent, as we start looking at a visionary approach to entry into new markets. So give us some thoughts on that, Lindsay.
Yeah, thanks, Lal. It's amazing to hear actually what Google's doing with the sharing of skills, because I think that's actually one of the core things that large tech businesses can actually do in this kind of environment. We've seen it with Google Garage in the UK, or Garage as they say in the UK, which also shared a lot of skills for the SMEs there. We've seen it with Amazon Web Services that have done a similar thing in the UK as well, training e-commerce businesses. And I think that's one of the things that we've striven very strongly to do in South Africa throughout this period, which has been very tough. We've seen a lot of businesses that we were speaking to in our sort of integration pipeline who literally shut their doors. You know, we would speak to them, say in June, and say, great, we're on track for integration, here are all the docs, how can we help? And 2 weeks later, their doors were shut. And they're shut permanently. So we've tried to do, as much as we're a scale up ourselves, you know, we're certainly not a behemoth with millions of employees. We've tried to provide as much support as possible, whether it's integration support and that sort of thing. And I think that's one of the key trends we've seen. You know, e-commerce, we all know, has just shot through the roof throughout this period in South Africa. It's matured the market in a way that I don't think anybody would have anticipated. I think we've seen 2 to 3 years of growth and maturation in probably 3 months, once e-commerce was allowed to flourish again after the hard lockdown. And we've seen that, you know, every man and his dog now has an e-commerce store, which is brilliant. And I think it's absolutely the way that they need to go. But we're seeing that there's a skills gap there. So we have clients and partners of ours who've said, great, do you have a WooCommerce plugin, for example, for our WooCommerce page? And we go, yeah, here it is. Great. Here's the API. Crack on. So excited to work with you. And they go, great. Now what? And there's a significant gap there in how we actually help them integrate. And we've tried to do that as much as possible, but we're also limited by the fact that, you know, resources are very stretched. We're a very small team in this country and in other places. So we've tried very strongly to provide support in that regard. I think the point about access to markets is something that What3Words specifically provides for new businesses. We've actually just integrated with Dawnwing, the last mile carrier in South Africa, and they can now offer any of their e-commerce clients, or indeed any of their other clients, the ability to turn a What3Words address received from one of their customers into a GPS coordinate for last mile delivery. And they've done that because we've seen that the efficiencies that you get from delivering to a What3Words address compared to a traditional address can be as high as 44%, because you can start doing really clever things with route optimization because you have a geocode, which is really important. So that's why we're seeing logistics companies come on board. But essentially, we've also seen, because of this explosion of e-commerce, which has been brilliant, we've seen new markets come online. So those who are in informal areas, rural areas, informal settlements, townships with inadequate addressing, so sort of half addressed, half not. Maybe I'm at plot 274H, plot, you know, unit D or whatever in Mabopane. It's not necessarily an address you can plug into an e-commerce store. And so we're sort of plugging that gap and allowing them to add a What3Words address as well. So a lot of those businesses have actually also then sped up their integration. So it's been interesting to see how access to new markets suddenly, because everybody has an address in South Africa, they just need to find out what it is. Even those in the middle of, whether it's Swellendam or the middle of the Karoo, they actually have a way to talk about where they are. That suddenly opens up a new market, not just for logistics carriers, but also for their clients potentially, who can start actually talking about, you know, new innovations and how to offer this something to a completely new demographic. I think you've also seen this period really speed up innovation for how to service those markets, particularly sort of informal areas and rural areas, townships. You've seen the likes of Orderkasi really step up its work, which is delivering, it's a bit like Uber Eats, but for township food and township restaurants, which is brilliant. So you can actually order food from, you know, your childhood home and get it delivered to you. And we've also seen partnerships between, I think it's Parcel Ninja and Unilever and Wumdrop, who are doing some really interesting things about servicing spaza shops in these communities as well. So these new markets are opening up. It's something that we've been very conscious about supporting. But I think that skills transfer that Alice referred to is really, really important, because we're seeing a significant dearth. So people are taking the plunge, and it is a really big deal to set up your own business, especially in this environment. And it's a really scary thing. So if you can provide as much support as possible, we're certainly trying to do that.
Yeah, and it's important. So these are, for the audience, really, these are just some of the support structures that you might look at, or some of the ways to look. And Lindsay was saying, yeah, it's very, very difficult to set your business up in this environment at the moment. Believe me, I don't think there's ever an easy time to do it. So I think we just have to go for it and do it, and make use of these, and just to look through which tools and levers we have or platforms we have available to us. Toby, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. There's a lot of questions coming in around, Gary Joseph has asked, Jason has also asked, Kevin. They've been asking a lot about how we actually develop the skills, but not only in conventional metropolitan areas, perhaps in some of the faraway reaches. One of my pet interests at the moment is also to create opportunities in the nether parts of South Africa and in other parts of the continent. So it's the non-metropolitan areas. While I'm talking to all three of you, I'm thinking, you know, what we should do is put something together that we can create economic opportunities in places that are the non-traditional metropolitan areas, so that we can actually have a direct impact on levels of inequality and high levels of unemployment in some of those areas, because that's where we actually need to create opportunity. Give some thought to that, all of you. But for now, Toby, give us some idea of what you think might be some of the interesting technological. So you're saying have a read of Stuff Magazine, and you'll find a lot of these. But maybe give us some inputs right now and some of the technologies we small businesses should look for, and maybe you've got some insights into how we can actually build those skills, educate in anticipation of technological transformation.
I'm going to go straight to, thank you, Lyal. I'm going to go straight to the question about the skills, because I've had a very atypical education experience myself. I didn't get glasses until I was nearly 13. So my experience of traditional school environment was, I had no idea the blackboard was part of the experience. I couldn't see it. Obviously, if you can't see it, you have no idea. It was only when I got glasses, just before I went to high school, that I realized how much of the rest of it was. So my experience of learning was I read books, because that's what I could see. And I was a vociferous reader. My late brother was dyslexic, and we were building a house for my parents, and my mother kept going on and on about where the bookshelves were to go. And he turned to her and he said, "What's the big deal with the bookshelves?" And my mother looked at him and she said, "We're book people." And I really love that phrase. And they do studies in the world about, and especially in emerging markets, about how just having a book, a small child having a book in their life, they take it home from school. If they live in a township, they can read it at home, or the impact of having books in the house or a bookshelf, and what that does for education, because ultimately that's what we're looking at. The learning skills as an adult is an ongoing form of self-education, right? So the world is filled with amazing self-service educational resources, for want of another word. Wikipedia, Google itself, you can find just about anything. Khan Academy, amazing things. Get Smarter, Coursera, depending on what level you are in terms of your education. But really, at the end of the day, the kinds of skills that people need to function, firstly just as a consumer and then as a business person, are essentially based on a smartphone. If you can use your smartphone with efficiency, not only can you be a good communicator on social networks or search the internet for relevant information, that itself is a skill. To think about the right way to ask a question of Google to get the information that you want, and the fact that Google will process the information, your question, and give you a relevant answer, that's pretty profound. So very often I say to people, like at Stuff, we tried every service, Slack, Telegram, Microsoft Teams. And in the end, for a long time, we've shifted, but for a long time, we used WhatsApp. Why? Because everybody in my organization understood how to use WhatsApp. I have two different kinds of people who work for me, very tech-savvy journalists and less tech-savvy sales and admin people. So we got everybody using a system that they could use. You don't need to use Slack to communicate across your whole network or Google Meets, or you can just use the technology that's available to you. We've since moved, in no small part because I think Facebook is evil, and I fear for them being the conduit for my communication. So we use other apps. We use Telegram, we use Slack. But at the end of the day, you don't have to use some highfalutin system. As Michael Jordan mentioned, the corporates go and buy all of this stuff, and then these millennial kids come in and go, "Why are you using that? Why don't you use this? It's free, it's whatever." But please remember, the most important rule is that if the service is for free, you are the product. If the product is for free, you are the product. And at some point, someone's going to mine your data, which is why I fear for using WhatsApp as a communication tool. Email is profound. You know, I know that Google did some research before you got here, Alistair, when Luke McKen was still the country manager, that Google did with Worldwide Works, and found that small South African businesses that just had a website, just a website, were something like a third to half more efficient than other businesses who didn't. So just the basics of business. If you have a business, have a website, have a basic website that says what you do, how to contact you. You know, we forget that this is the essence of things, the yellow pages. Remember those telephone books, you know? Now the only good use for a telephone book is to pile it on your desk so you can put your laptop on top of it. But that's the kind of information. What information about your business do you want people to see in the world? Put it out there. Go to Google Maps. Take ownership of your address and your business address. I did that for Stuff Magazine, and the way Google verified it, I love this, was to send me a postcard to that address. And on the postcard was the code I had to put into the system to say I received the postcard. It's a two-factor authentication of a different scale. But that's the basics. And then if you want to upskill yourself, use your natural human curiosity. That's my personal life story. I was interested in things, so I read about them. I was fascinated by science and physics. I can't do the maths, so I could never study them, but I'm fascinated by it. And also, luckily, my best friend was a wonderkind who ended up being the technical advisor to Microsoft's first chief technology officer and having weekly meetings with Bill Gates. If you can't find yourself a Gregor Norriskin, read Stuff Magazine, but also just find the kind of information that's useful. And after this, I'll tweet a whole bunch of links of the stuff that we've done at Stuff about how to upskill yourself. At the beginning of lockdown, we did a huge effort to make sure that we identified educational resources across different levels. If you've got a degree and you want to study Coursera, which is the online service that you can study study courses from Harvard or Stanford or any of those. But Khan Academy is a fantastic. You know, one of my junior reporters said to me, I got through school using Khan Academy. It's video tutorials of just about everything. Upskill yourself. You can never have too much knowledge about stuff that happens in business. I'm no good with numbers, but I understand the concepts around them, and I understand the simple thing, which is never spend more than you make, and spend as little as you possibly can. Because at the end of the day, you know, I say to so many journalists who come to me and say, I'd like to start my own business. And I say, please don't. There are two kinds of people who should work for themselves and people who shouldn't. Most people shouldn't, because they don't realize that the fantasy or the fallacy of owning your own business is that what you do when you own your own business is run the business. When you're an engineer or an architect or a journalist, you don't spend all your time being a journalist or an architect or an engineer. You spend most of your time in running the business. And that's what running a business is about. I never wanted to myself. I watched both my parents run their own small businesses, but I got retrenched and I had no choice. And it turns out I am one of those people who works for themselves. But most people shouldn't. If you do, don't do the things that are hard. There are cloud-based services for just about everything. And to come back to the skills issue, I think about this a lot. I really, really, really do. Because how does someone growing up in South Africa whose only access to the internet is a smartphone, if they're lucky, with a fraction of the kind of data you would get if you're in South Africa, certainly no free in a big city like Joburg or Cape Town. But what would you learn? And it's quite profound, Lyal, the examples. There was one young guy who wrote a 40-page business plan using a little Nokia, using that predictive text that was called T9. He did that on his phone. If there's a will, there's a way. But the thing about skills is that if you want to learn something, you can. So what is the skill you'd like to know? Google it and find out. I've just built my son a fire truck during lockdown using old wooden things. I don't have those skills. I failed woodwork at high school, the 2 years we were forced to do it. And all I did was practice, So that's, to my mind, if there's something you want to learn and find out, the resources for learning it and doing it are amazing. I've watched people who work for me go and do courses about digital advertising. Google runs these courses, a whole bunch of advertisers do it. How to understand social media and what you can do with social media. I mean, it's, of course, you could always just hire a 15-year-old and they'll do your social media like they're born to it, because they are. But anything you want, you can find and Google it. I'm not doing your free advertising, Alistair. It's just, you know, Google is the Xerox of the day. That and it's available. It comes down to how much you want to learn and what you want to put into it. And I think it's truly remarkable that we live in the world as it is, that you can find anything anywhere. But it's also a matter of curating the information, right? Like, you don't have to read the entire Wikipedia article to understand it. You know, you can read the summary at the top or the sections you need. You don't have to read every single word of every single thing. But the fact that it's also self-service is fantastic. And to answer your question, Gary, Joseph, and Kevin and the other Gary, to get those skills out in rural areas, I've been thinking about this for years, and it's a longer conversation. But the great news is you can do that. In fact, the University of Johannesburg's Business School has a series of amazing courses and master classes that I have seen on the website. I did my homework now. That you can do that teach you the basics and the essence of business. You know, it's really you know, I mean, luckily I was born Jewish, and with the gene code comes, you know, some strange understanding of what's called seichel, which is financial common sense. But the essence is, my essence is, you know, don't spend more than you earn, always save, and don't buy the flashy things. Nobody needs to drive. You know, you walk into a cell phone store or a laptop store, and the salesman always tries to sell everybody the Lamborghini or the Mercedes. Most of us drive Toyotas, right? Or, you know, I don't want to differentiate the car brands negatively, but just understand what your requirements and your needs are. Don't let someone get you to buy a Mercedes when all you need is a Kia. In terms of technology.
So, and just to look at that, because there are a lot of questions that are coming through directly to you, Alistair, around, you know, how do small businesses access, you know, the marketing platforms or the marketing solutions from Google, etc. But before, I think let's speak to that if you've got a quick response to this. But I also want to start, and we've only got a few minutes left of the session. So, what else? I've got another question, and this is for all the panelists to think about, or for all the speakers to think about, is what is government doing? Has it been an inhibitor of this progress that we're making? Are they creating, or what should they be doing? Alistair, you and I spoke earlier about the role of governments as an enabling big tech to stimulate SME growth? So let's touch on all of these, and then we'll come back to something around some new tech ideas for small businesses.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, with all things in life, we need to sort of approach it with a systems thinking, sort of framework of sort of drivers and outcomes. So I think anything that has to do with digital connectivity must start with access. And access, you know, as we say, is obviously affected by high data cost in our country. That's directly linked to the undersea cable. So the big tech companies, Facebook, Google, we've invested billions and billions of dollars in laying down, you know, sort of undersea cable to try and bring the data cost down. Big telco companies are also doing their bit to reduce data cost, and they need to accelerate that. Government needs to release spectrum, you know, to make it cheaper for basically all of us to access the internet. 5G is here, and these things can really transform lives. So big take around the need to drive access. And I think we're also seeing that OEMs are bringing down the cost of smartphones. We as tech companies have to ensure that our products use very little data. So that's why you'll see products like Android Go, Google Go, YouTube Go, which use very, very little data, and they work and they actually optimize for sort of entry-level smartphones. So everybody has to do their bit to reduce the barriers, because if you reduce the barriers, you know, the economic potential for every South African, for every African, is just massive. And I think, you know, the simple way for SMEs to kind of access support is really to kind of do a search for Grow with Google, which is where you will find all the support for small business. do a search for Think with Google, which is a newsletter we put out regularly, which gives you free training, case studies, very digestible stories of what you can do to really accelerate your business performance. And then there's also the IT certificates we give out through Coursera and those kind of service providers, where people can literally do 6 to 12-month IT courses to make them job ready. We've got a program now that's aiming to place 1 million job seekers into sort of IT roles with free training. We've put a bunch of cash in YES, the Youth Employment Service, to try and absorb some youth into job opportunities. We're also doing quite a bit of work with the PrayCelt Foundation. We've also put cash in there to help micro businesses, SMEs. So there's tons of help. You won't go wrong if you just do a Google search for Google Assistance with small business or Google digital skills training. It really is that simple, and you will find a way to access the help.
That's wonderful. And there's also obviously Harambee is another fantastic platform for you to access some of the help around that. Alistair, we're going to come back to you on some of the other things. I think one of the things, and because I'm going to go on to Lindsay first, but just for all of us to start thinking about is 2 tech-enabling business ideas that business can access and switch on tomorrow. So it's a very, very quick one. I know that we've been touching on this all the way through, but also I want to also talk a little bit about, you spoke about the importance of low-cost data. And what about, Lindsay, what about those people that are offline? Maybe you can talk a little bit about that. And then we're going to go from Lindsay to Toby and then back to Alistair. And I think that's then going to be a wrap, guys. So let's keep it quite tight.
Yeah, 100%. As Alistair mentioned, actually, the onus is also on SMEs or large businesses to actually build products that are hyper lightweight and can be used by the majority. So we've done the same. And here in South Africa, we actually built something called the Find Me site, the What 3 Words Find Me site. And it does one thing really well, which is to show the 3 words of where you are standing at that exact point. And that's actually how emergency services use our tech to find somebody's What 3 Words address, even if they're in the middle of nowhere, so they can get to them in an emergency. And we've had successful rescues using the tech, which is great. That was a 7 kilobyte site, hyper lightweight, like a fraction of an email that we built explicitly for that purpose because we know the data situation in South Africa. We found that actually still the problem was that data is also such a binary issue. Even if it's only 7 kilobytes that you need, sometimes you just don't have data, and people weren't actually having access to emergency services as a result. And so we approached Vodacom, and they partnered with us to then zero rate that tech. So which is even more inclusive. So there's certain JVs and partnerships which can be really, really useful in terms of providing access, but we went also a step further and actually created our tech to be able to be used offline. So if you download the What 3 Words app, you can actually use it offline on your smartphone, and as long as your phone has line of sight to the sky, so you can speak to the satellite, you can actually see the 3 words of where you are, and you can communicate that even if it's via radio or whatever. So that's absolutely critical. I think in terms of also where government is maybe letting the side down, so to speak, is, I mean, Toby's spoken about this before, in terms of procurement and actually just paying people on time. That's a huge challenge. We have chosen as a business to provide our technology to emergency services around the world for free because we are a social impact business. We think it's actually a human right to be able to talk about your location in an emergency, to have your life saved. And so we've provided that tech to free to South African emergency services. But if we had to go through those procurement processes with government entities like Gauteng EMS and others, I mean, we wouldn't, we started speaking to them a year ago, we still wouldn't be where we need to be with them. So shortening those timelines also makes a lot of sense. And also just looking at actually how SMEs, particularly these new technologies, can actually provide or seriously plug the gap in terms of basic infrastructure. What 3 Words, obviously, I'll speak about, plugs the gap of a traditional addressing system that is analog and constantly needs to be updated and is very sort of old school and slow moving. Equally, you have businesses like Solarize out of Kenya and working in South Africa as well that provides renewable energy solutions. If government can't literally keep the lights on, how are you supposed to grow a small business? If you don't know when you're going to have power, how do you actually hire a new team and get things going off the ground? So actually there's an opportunity there for businesses like Solarize to actually provide services to SMEs to get them off the grid to become sustainable and independent themselves. And then eventually, ideally, to grow Solarize into the kind of business that can actually partner with government potentially and actually start sharing best practice in terms of renewables. So yeah, lots of different threads there. But I think plugging that infrastructure gap is really important and seeing the potential for smaller businesses to play a bigger role in that sort of crucial switching from gears is important.
No, I think that's precisely right. Absolutely. It's when we start kind of collecting the small businesses and the different things that they do so well, let's not forget that the agility of small businesses makes them more competitive in many respects. And also their contextual knowledge. So their contextual intelligence in very, very specific areas is crucial. And if you can collect that, if you can create some type of collective, you will start solving the biggest challenges that we face in society, especially in these high context environments that we live in South Africa and other parts of Africa. And that's why it's so exciting talking to people like yourselves, is because immediately while we're having this chat, Lindsay's talking about this and Toby's talking about these things of overcoming that. And then with Alistair's inputs from Google, these challenges are surmountable. Not only that, we can not only survive this, but if we come through this COVID period, we will thrive. Toby, one or two final words. I don't know if we want to really go into the role that government and regulation and all these privacy issues face. Maybe we should end on a high note. Why don't you give us a few little tech enabling business ideas, or just tell us something that we should really end off on this at this point?
Sure. So this is a rarity for me. I'm not the person who is blaming government, even though generally I do. But I was a reporter during apartheid. I understood that you never use government. You never use government sources. You need to do what you have to do. I'm not interested in blaming whose fault it is. I just want to get the job done. During lockdown, I found myself defending the CEO of Eskom. And my wife said to me, "Who are you? Have you been taken by the body snatchers?" And I said, "No, I just don't have that time or energy to worry about someone else's problems. All of my energy is focused on our business." And I hear what you're saying, Lindsay. I mean, we shouldn't have to worry about power and connectivity, but the cost of doing business are the cost of doing business. I learned this from interviewing some pretty amazing CEOs, and every company has challenges. You can waste your energy moaning about the lack of electricity, or you can buy a generator, or you can buy a bunch of batteries, or you can use a company like Solarize. That's, to my mind, the best way to do it. There are problems. Let's just go solve the problems. And I suppose I am problem orientated in that way, of solving orientated. The tech tools that are available, they're just fantastic. If you're not using web-based email like Gmail or Hotmail or Outlook, it's now called, you should totally be doing that, because your mail is so important to you. Your messaging, you need to back it up online. If you use Android, you can use your Gmail account or G Drive to store all your data. You should be doing this with everything. All of your data should be online. Security is a very, very important thing, especially your smartphone. Have a password on it. For all the services you log on to, email, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Dropbox, whatever they are, make sure you turn on what's called two-factor authentication. Basically, your password is the first factor. The second factor can be anything. Usually, people get sent an SMS. And that's less secure because people can spoof your account, but you can use a thing called an authenticator. Google makes one, Microsoft makes one. I use a password manager called LastPass. Very, very good, lastpass.com. We have articles which I will send out to everybody, but use the free services, but look at what the paid for services give you, because then you're not selling your data or something. You're selling something. If you're getting a service for free, there is something you're paying for, and it's usually your usage patterns or how you were. I turn off, Alistair won't like this, I turn off all location services on my phone of any kind. Companies don't need that to give you the services they say they do. Companies offer you stuff for free. They give you that much, and they expect you to give them that much in terms of personal data and other data. You don't have to do that. But make sure that you have passwords. You have two passwords, authenticator, and one final word. Ronnie Apteker, the guy who started Internet Solutions, has a funny joke where he says, when you run a business, you're always a salesman. So basically, if you run a business, you're always selling yourself. So with that in mind, read More Stuff magazine. Thank you, Lyal.
No, thank you, Toby. And one or two final words from Alistair, one or two final words, and then over to you, Lindsay.
Awesome. So, I think quick business ideas. Everybody has a cell phone with the camera, and the world is always interested in content. So anybody who who's able to take pictures, even if you're not, just keep practicing every day. You can become a paid photographer or even videographer. You can supply your images to YouTube, you can get paid for it. So I think people must just be resourceful. If you have a car and you don't have a job, there is so much you can do. You can drive around to interesting locations, take amazing pics, sell those. There's a company called Getty Images, which is a stock photography business, which is not South African and doesn't have a lot of local images. And advertising agencies and publishers are always looking for geographically relevant images. I think people can do a lot with their camera phones.
That's a really cool, simple solution there as well. Thank you, Alistair. That's great. And Lindsay?
I'd say, I mentioned earlier somebody not knowing how to integrate their WooCommerce plugin, become a bit of a niche expert in something that's quite new. E-commerce is such an opportunity. So many people don't know how to do the fundamentals, and you can, as Toby said, quickly upskill yourself on Coursera or any of the other skill services online, become a bit of an expert, and you can suddenly start a little business quite easily and start selling your time for that in a kind of consulting way. So yeah, similar to Alistair's idea, just go out there and actually find your own business.
Very cool. Just straight, direct, quick to the point. I like it. I like it very much. Okay, everybody. Lindsay, Toby, Alistair, thank you so much. Really, as always, I love having conversations with you. And this time we got to share it with a few people out there through the Business Day and through the Johannesburg Business School. Thank you so much for joining us. Look out for this on Twitter and look out for all those other bits and pieces that Toby mentioned. Alistair, we also look forward to looking at more news from your side. And Lindsay, we will find you. We have your map and your 3 words, and we'll find you soon for some further fantastic conversations. Thank you very much to the Johannesburg Business School. Thank you very much to Business Day SME Matters. We look forward to engaging with you all soon. Over and out for now, everybody.